Mm, Hello again. So let's start with your name and where you are now. Mhm,
Gaie, and I'm in London now,
mhm,
where obviously since lockdown I have been. So,
mhm, mhm. And can you shortly say a few words about you? Uh, mm, Whether, of course, you are a Gestalt therapist, but do you are you still working and all that?
yeah,
Short, brief information from your side for the beginning.
yes, I'm now, I do much less work than I used to. Obviously, at the moment, no overseas work. And since 2016, my husband was dying really. He was very ill. And so I wasn't doing any overseas work. I think I did one residential in Ireland, which is quite near, so that I didn't have to go far. But I missed that because I liked going to a lot of places before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do much more supervision than therapy now.
Mm-hmm.
And that of course continues with Zoom. So it has been for me a way of staying sane to be working and seeing people and having to think, and as you think very hard when you're supervising. So I've been grateful for the work.
Mm-hmm. Aren't you also tired, because people say that that Zoom is tiring when you spend like hours in front of the screen? Is it yeah?
Well, it's interesting that I'm not working enough, to have it as because the people I supervise often are doing five sessions or 6 sessions a day on Zoom, and I certainly don't do that. And so, but lately I found that it just doesn't tire me so much, and I think it's partly if I use a bigger picture, and I can now have my I'm not doing it now, but I can have my computer screen transferred to my television screen. I have a device. So I'm looking at a much bigger picture, and then it's easier to pick up the signals, I think.
Yeah, this is also, yeah, my observation. I don't like to have this connection when people are only like so small, tiny.
Yes.
Okay, so if we could start with you as a human, since it's humans in Gestalt project, could you say a little more about yourself as a person, what your qualities are, values, passions?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, I don't think I've spent a lot of time on self-definition in my life,
Mm.
but what I remember is that when I was at university, what came into my mind as soon as you asked that question, there was a university magazine that had what they called the ISIS idol. Every week there was a different idol. And so when it was my turn to be the idol, you always had an adjective with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they took some major quality, and they had trouble with me. So in the end, I was the gallimaufric idol. I don't suppose you know that word. Do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, gallimaufry is a big stew of all sorts of lots and lots of ingredients in a big stew. So that was talking about me when I was 18 or 20. And I think it's a bit the same now, because there's a bit of this and a bit of that. And I've just published a novel. I just during lockdown, so that was a new thing to do. And let me think. I married, have children. Very interested in education. So, and one of my children, he has set up and is running international children's charities, which are about educating at the grassroots level, and empowering the teachers at that level. And I think that's inherited from me. I'm very interested in that, and I do a little bit of work in schools, not at the moment, but I have.
Mm-hmm.
And some people will only know me as a sort of gardener and cook, because until a year or two ago, I lived mostly in the country and had a big vegetable garden that I'd made in a corner of a field, so that there was nothing there when I started. And after 35 years, when I had it, it was a very established garden with a pond and trees and growing an enormous lot of vegetables, so that we use those all through the year. And so now I'm in London, I buy packets. It's different. And yes, I like traveling, both for work and otherwise. I'm sure there are. Oh yes, very interested in mushrooms, and was a fellow of the British Mycological Society, and I keep thinking, there are lots of bits and pieces. A sort of jack of all trades, really.
Yeah, really, from different corners, completely.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
And how do you think? Who made you this kind of a person? I mean, how is that you have developed into that kind of person, interested in variety of the world? That is, yeah.
I don't know how much I've never thought about it, but I don't know how much it's to do with being brought up in the war in the provinces. And I was born in central London, and then at the beginning of war we moved immediately out of the way of bombs, moved to the middle of England. So I went to school there, and my mother always complained, oh God, this provincial life. She had a wish to be in the urban grandeur, and I think, but of course it was all I knew, really. But really nothing happened, because there was no petrol. You didn't use a car anymore. I didn't go on buses, really. We walked to school and walked back. We walked back for our midday meal and back to school in the afternoon. One neighbour, who was a widow and with a daughter in my class, had bicycles, and I had a bicycle, so we used to cycle out and have picnics, and they were the biggest thing that happened, really. So it's maybe from a basis of nothing happening that I began being interested in everything. And then when my father came back from the war, it was obvious that he has a very curious mind, and he used every morning to say, right, what shall we do today? And that was in later years when he was still working, when I was late teens and going to university. But we would all get in the car, take a picnic, and then he'd have all the flower books and the bird books, and you'd study all those things. We'd we had a house near the coast. We'd go on the coast and pick up wood that had been thrown up, so that we could burn that wood, which was burned with wonderful blue flames because it had the salt in it. And so there were always projects of that kind. On Christmas Day, we'd take all the garden spades and go to the beach and build the most enormous sandcastles, which you can with great big spades. And so I think that he modeled carpe diem, live for the moment. And he did it magnificently, so that even the grandchildren remember, Tide, he was called, that he set that model of life being fun, and you must do something all the time. So it's a nice model to have.
And I'm still thinking of your life outside London, in the village. You said you spent like.
It was that time strange. I realised I was sitting against a picture of the market the marketplace in
There.
Newark. Yes, that's, yeah.
Wow. And it was, it depicts the times, I mean, a long time ago, no? I can't see very clearly the painting.
It's all the stalls. It was, that would be contemporaneous with my childhood, that painting was done.
Okay.
But the market was important, Wednesday and Saturday, big days of the week. Whoa, the market, market day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I started asking you about this life in village when you were older. I mean, when you were
yes.
married, but yeah, but I am also somehow struck how I don't know that your father for sure was somehow affected by the war, and yet he maintained so curious about the world, so wanted to somehow provide his children with different projects, with different ideas. So it's hopeful. I don't know how to put it.
You make that picture of it. I think that I don't know how aware he was of his children. I think that he was excited to live in that way, and he loved the company of the children, of the people who were in the family round about. But I don't think it was he was necessarily being educative in what he did. But he was a good model in that he did. He knew how to enjoy himself. Yes.
And still, before getting to your to this image, I mean, I have now in my mind of this village that you spent over 30 years there. So, do you think?
Even that, it's not very correct, because the place where I spent 35 years, I was always living in London as well. I spent half the time in the village, in the same village, the Washington village. It was a hamlet of 6 houses. It was houses at the bottom of a no-through road near the Thames. And so you knew everybody in the 6 houses. And the houses were in a way like one house, you walked in and out. And the cat belonged to the whole hamlet.
Wow, okay.
And he didn't belong to anyone. The hamlet belonged to the cat. And there was one famous actor who came down at weekends, and we always felt very cross with the cat, because the cat always went straight to the famous actor's house when the actor was there, as if he was a little bit of a snob, that cat, you know?
Yeah, apparently. he or she had a good taste.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Nice. So, okay. So how come you? So in the winter term, you were moving back to? You were coming back to London? Was it?
No, every week. I had the middle of the week, and I worked in London.
Okay.
So we have about a 3 or 4 day weekend.
Okay.
3 days in London.
Right. Okay. So it's not that coming back now to London is like, I mean, you obviously missing this village life, and
but I've had this house all the time. Yes. So
of course, to work and to work as a therapist, as a supervisor, I imagine.
Easier in London than in a hamlet.
Yeah, but well, I at first I thought, oh, maybe there like a sort of as a, what's the name of this in California, this place?
Oh, yeah. Big Sur, or near there. I know where you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in this British style.
There were times when it was a little bit like that, because this will be not more than 35 years ago when we first had that cottage. And those days, when there were not the strict sort of protocols around training,
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to take all the Gestalt students who were interested. They would come and we would have a residential at my cottage.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them brought tents and were in the garden, and some used the spare bedrooms that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we took turns, little groups, in doing the cooking. And we could walk down and swim in the river in the afternoons. And I cleared one sitting room, and then that was the training room, and they worked at Gestalt as a training group.
Mm-hmm.
And there were one or two who can remember those days, and they appreciated them very much. They were lovely holidays with a lot of learning in them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I did that several times. Yeah.
Oh, wow! So I wasn't that far guessing, but it was back in the 80s or 70s, 80s.
35 years ago. Oh yes, we moved there in 81, so it would be in the 80s. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And then trading became much more circumscribed and duller in some ways. So with many more sort of Freudian concepts on it, and so certainly having the trainer, sleeping in the same house and eating with them. So it's not like that anymore, alas.
Yeah. So exactly. So I obviously am curious now. How did that all start for you? I mean, Gestalt therapy. How did you come to Gestalt therapy? Can you please start saying about this?
Yeah, it's strange to think quite how it happened. Oh yes. I had a training as a behavioral scientist. I've got a diploma in behavioral science. Mm-hmm. And this is telling some of the bones of it. Mm-hmm. And when I was on one residential in that training, it was again it was in the 70s and very avant-garde, that it was student-led, that we wrote the diploma for the board to agree, and wrote a much harder one than any real board would have written, very rigorous. Mm-hmm. And then we had to fulfill it. And the tutors were very lazy and didn't do much. It was very, very much the students were having to do everything, which was wonderful. But we worked extraordinarily hard, and we were very earnest about what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And that's how I account for the fact that I woke in the middle of the night when we were on a residential, and it had been full on for days. And I had a peculiar sort of vision, dream, whatever, which in retrospect I think lasted about 4 seconds. But it was not verbal, and so it gets very clumsy when I talk about it in words. But the way I can put it into words, it was that I recognized that the whole time something is happening in me, in everybody, that is all my experience being brought up all I could say is like a sort of dough but black, mm-hmm. A soft bread dough. It's working round, relentlessly working round, and what it brings up to the top is the next I want, the next awareness, which leads to action. Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely fascinating, and that to me was Gestalt formation. Mm-hmm. You see, and I was absolutely sold on the idea that this was a real key to how the mind works. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I've stayed with that assumption mm-hmm. ever since. And so I have got a strong belief in all the things that Pearl says about organismic self-regulation and the wisdom of the organism, and allowing awareness rather than introspecting for what's. But the I want was quite important, because that's the next thrust to action, like the next action. whether it's to eat something or sigh or whatever it is, but you know, the body's telling you what to do. So that was a way of coming to Gestalt, I think.
Without actually reading anything.
Well, I must have read things, but that's right, and it's hazy in my mind now of what all the bits and pieces were. I mean, I know sort of anti things because I was in a training in the States with national training laboratories and got to know some of the trainers, and I was I respected them very much. They were wonderful people, and I remember a conversation some of them were having, and they said, "Oh yes, on the West Coast there's some really strange stuff happening at them. There's a man called Frederick Pearls, and don't touch him. You know, he's dreadful." And they, of course, they listed because he did. I think he was after all the women, and you know, in the hot baths and things, and so, and they were fastening on that rather than on anything else. So I knew that. And I'm sorry, I've just turned my phone off because it went, yeah. Yes.
So you've heard about him, but yeah, surely some ideas maybe from were coming to you, and then somehow genuinely in you, but also were coming.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of, and it sounds as some sort of enlightenment almost. I mean, because we do have such kind of, short moments sometimes of, wow, okay, this is it. No, that's a kind of, I don't know how to call it, but yeah, a satori.
Yes, I think that's what would be a nice Gestalt word for it. Yes, a mini satori at least, but it was, I think, a satori. Yeah, really was. So it stayed in my mind.
So
and I remember.
Go on.
I was going to breakfast the next day. I was trying to explain it to people because it was such a big experience, and you could see people's faces sort of glaze over, and could you pass the toast? I'm sorry, this person doesn't seem to understand.
Yeah.
I can't do anything. I'll just keep turning it off.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So I wonder, because the people you were surrounded by at that moment, so they were thinking of mind processes more as not as a process. I don't know, how would you describe this opposite? Just for me, I wonder.
I think that they were all thinking about behavior and motivation, you know. But yes. I think they were much more from theory books about system stuff and maybe Freudian thinking or something. But it is not quite what I was. I no doubt I was describing it in a rather strange manner, you know. So, but anyway, nobody much understood me. So occasionally, I mean, I will tell people that if they're asking about it. But I know that because they've asked, they're going to be ready to listen. Where I was trying to put my story into the general.
Which was, I mean, I guess that there's even though you were sort of forgotten by your teachers and tutors, whatever, but this group, I guess you must have felt really supported in this group, that you actually, when the first thing when you woke up was like, okay, I'm gonna tell them, even though it's so not discursive anyhow, but I will try to put this into words. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was definitely a group. But it took 3 years, that diploma, and so we did know each other pretty well, and with a lot of residentials, and so we did know each other.
I mean, in terms of, you know, that those ideas actually came to you when you were there in their company. I mean, I don't want to take it from you. I mean, but
yes, yes. But that's right. It was that there's something contextual in it happening. Yes, that's right. That's right.
Wow,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful story in itself. And how did that happen then? I mean, more formally and institutionally. What?
After that,
Yes, after that.
I think I mean, I can't remember, but I must have had some theory of Gestalt and read about it a bit. And then somebody came over here, an American, and started some Gestalt training. And I never was in the full training, but I went to some of his events, and in fact got to know him in the end. And it's terrible. I'm just trying to remember the name. He was Larry, and he stopped being Larry and turned himself into Isha. Isha Bloomberg. I can't remember the surname of the man, but he apparently had been thrown out of the New York Institute. He was a qualified psychotherapist, and he'd got degrees. He was a very clever man, but he was quite a ruthless man. And I think he was thrown out because he was just too rough somehow. And so training with him was horrendous in that other people said to me, he hates strong women. And I was seen as a strong woman. So it was as if he was going to cut me off at the knees if he could. And I was going to not to be cut off at the knees, though I probably felt I was. But nevertheless, I learned so much from him. And I've been in touch with his family since, and since he died. And I've been encouraging his wife to write a biography of him, because he was worth it. You know, he did great things in teaching Gestalt in Europe. But people who were, as it were, cut off at the knees by him, then would have the revenge by saying he was horrible and bad and all the rest, which he was in some ways. But he was very brilliant, and he was like Pearls in being a brilliant diagnostician. He really looked at you and he could say things about you that were unpleasantly true.
Okay, so I imagine Laura Peirce and her surrounding at that moment, maybe New York Institute, that was not a place anymore for kind of people. But I don't. I mean, I've been conducting those interviews, and maybe I don't know. Maybe someone mentioned his name, but he changed his name into. You said what?
The first name he changed. He was Larry something, and he turned it into Isha. And again, and I can probably find it somewhere because I think I've made reference to him in books. But Bloomberg comes up. But then I'm sure is that right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I am simply interested because not simply. It is like if this is an important person, even though
he was an important person historically, because in this country, because a woman who did stay in his training throughout then began a Gestalt sort of group, which turned into the Gestalt Center, which is the training center in London, which is where I work now, you see. And that was because she'd been to his training, so she started that. So you can see, he was.
For sure. No, it's not Lawrence Bloomberg. You think Lawrence Bloomberg?
Larry
Aisha Bloomberg. Yes, I can see it now.
There's an Isha Bloomberg.
Bloomberg, yeah.
You got him.
You pronounce it Isha. Isha. Okay. PhD, I can see, or.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, just to be aware among all those other established Gestalt therapist. I don't know if I ever heard of him. Maybe people saying something and I didn't get. But Bloomberg, okay. Mm-hmm.
But maybe you talk to a lot of people who are American based, and they probably wouldn't know him because he came over to Europe, you see. So
aha, so it's like when he came over to Europe, then he kind of
stayed there. First he was in London, and then he moved later to Italy, and he set up a centre in Italy, and that's where he married. And
so he actually, once again, please.
In comparatively late life, he married, and
okay, and he didn't come back to the States.
No.
Okay. Yeah, but I interviewed also people from Europe, also people like you know who first started the Gestalt training in Europe with people from the US. But yeah, anyway, it's interesting, and surely a biography like this would be a gift to the community. So so you said that you had that training with him, and then what's next if we move on chronologically?
Some Tavistock training, which is much more, because I was into behavioral science, and so it was much more about institutions and groups. And so that's another thing I do that I'd forgotten to say, that I do institutional and organizational consultancy as well. I've done quite a lot of consultancy with the NHS in there, in big hospitals in London.
National Health institution. Was that National Health NH system?
National Health. I suppose it is system. Yes, we just say NHS, and I don't think what it means, but it must be. Service. It's a National Health Service.
Yeah. Okay. Service. Right. Yeah, and so. And then in terms of bringing Gestalt to London, to the UK, so you were among those people who first actually started to work in Gestalt way?
Yes, and in, let me think. When I was in this behavioral science diploma, I was asked, because I was doing stuff to do with groups and group behavior, I was asked to run a group on television, a group that was not a therapy group, but just with a psychiatrist. We were just running a group to study the behavior of the group as it unfolds, you know, that sort. And so I did that. And having been seen on that, I was asked to work on a counselling course, because this was in the 70s when there wasn't much of that sort of training happening at all. And a bright woman called Bridget Proctor set up a counselling course. And I taught Gestalt on it.
Okay.
Because again, it was very free and easy, that you taught what you felt like teaching, and the other teachers were doing person-centered, or I can't remember what other brands there were. And it became embarrassing because all the students would come to the Gestalt one and not go to the others. And so the Gestalt became very, very popular. And so to deal with the huge enthusiasm, I used to have, in this very room, I used to have a group in the certain evenings. And again, I was extremely pure about the Gestalt nature of it, of spontaneity. There was no booking or saying when you were going to come. I said when I'd be there, and then we'd see who came. And so sometimes there'd be 4 people, and sometimes there'd be 23, you know, and and we do one-to-ones and and two chair works and everything, and so that was a lot of a lot of how people learn things, I think, about Gestalt, and it began to go round.
Oh, that was radical. That was really, I mean, radical. And together with those times, 70s, I imagine.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so maybe similar things happened here in the late 80s in Poland when I was trying to somehow justify why you haven't been informed about the book translation. Maybe it was somehow this way, spontaneous act.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so when it all started to get institutionalized and bureaucratized, or I don't know, formalizing, when it's all.
I think that was probably around the beginning of the 80s. It just began to be formalized, because then where the Gestalt, what became the Gestalt Center, was a group that met in somebody's house in Hampstead. And she had mattresses against the walls so that the noise wouldn't go through, and there was a lot of batakas, and it was a very demonstrative and cathartic, and lots of shouting and things that just don't happen anymore. It's all talk nowadays. and then the thing was formally given to 3 of the students, this little organization, whatever it was. And these 3 were the triumvirate which started the Gestalt Center, and they took premises near Old Street in London. And until very recently, they moved about, but they were near Old Street. But then Old Street became terribly expensive because all the IT people went there. And so the rents became so dreadful that now, by my good luck, the Gestalt Center's moved much nearer my house, so I can walk to it from here.
Wow.
So that's nice. Not that you need to walk anywhere now, because it's all Zoom.
Yeah. But so
that certainly was about 1980, probably. Yes, I think 80. That's right. I think it would have been just around 1980 or 81, because I remember doing a residential for them in 82, which is a year after I'd moved to the country. And with the money from that residential, I bought a machine which does sort of ploughing with one person, to start my vegetable garden. So
so this is how Gestalt gets instrumentalized.
Practical Gestalt. Yes. Body work.
If you like, yes. Yeah. So why haven't you engaged more into building this kind of Gestalt? In setting up this Gestalt Center, you wanted to be more. Okay, I will do a residential for you, but I won't get involved into forming this institution, this organization. Or I understood it wrong?
In the first instance, I don't think I was asked, because it was some of her students that were asked. And I was teaching in a different place, and so I was introducing Gestalt in a different way, and slightly more formal way. And so when they started to ask me to be a director or a trustee or whatever, I refused. It was partly because I lived partly out of London, and I didn't want more encumbrance. But partly that I like to keep, I didn't want to be enmeshed too much with it. And I suppose that's part of the gallimaufry thing, that's, rather than being stuck into one niche, to jump out from place to place. Yeah. So I've always said I feel like an aunt to the organization. And now I'm called the advisor emeritar or something. They've given me a title, you know. But
it's more formal than aunt.
That's right.
Yeah, but I understood that yeah, your free spirit wouldn't, I mean, yeah, somehow that this I yeah, I understand you. I mean, I am receiving you as more a free spirit, okay, who may go overseas, more may do residential. Uh,
Yes, yes, that's right.
Mhm.
And also there would have been other things that I was doing so that I wouldn't have time for doing that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, obviously. And if you were to tell me, well, being attracted by Gestalt therapy, Gestalt, yeah, ideas, has that been transforming in you, changing, and now you are interested in something else, or yeah, once attracted, then you kept this attraction, yeah, somehow developing in you, and or there were moments when you were attracted by this, interested there, and you wrote a book by that. How did that change? I mean, if you could describe a bit.
I'm not absolutely sure I'm following what you say, but as I'm
Yeah,
understanding you,
yeah.
I think that having assimilated Gestalt principles and believing in them and thinking that this is fine, I haven't needed to change those very much. I think that it does seem like as good an explanation as we can use at the moment, and it seems very usable. It seems to subsume all the other therapies in a way. You know, it makes it an anything goes therapy, and so I feel very secure in it. And so in that way, there's nothing that's really altered about that. It's just that the applications are in different places, I suppose. I mean, I've worked in a mental hospital and using the same principles there. And I worked with, there was a Homophilics Experiment with violent offenders to see, rather than being institutionalized in prisons, they could be put into therapy groups. They'd have to be responsible for themselves, live in a hostel, and turn up at therapy groups every day. And if they didn't, they'd be sent back to prison. And of course, they all opted for that because it sounds marvelous, you know. And almost all of them stood by the rules. One or two didn't, got sent back to prison, and used to send amazing love letters from prison that, you know, would I let them out? Would I? So I was, and again, I don't feel I had to change from anything really. It's just applicable anywhere really.
Yeah. So this is yeah. I couldn't somehow make myself understood, but yeah, that was my idea. How many different applications? Yeah, you started up in your professional career with Gestalt. I mean, as I'm hearing you now, and you applied Gestalt therapy to different fields, and were there specific particular fields that you were interested in more than others, whether it was happening spontaneously or I wonder.
I think I was far more reactive than proactive really, and if I got asked to go into places, I might say no because it just didn't speak to me, but if it spoke to me a bit, then I went in and did something. No, I think with most of my work, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
I can think of, yes, all the places where I've consulted, so many different ones really. And yeah, but it's not by my building a career along particular lines. You know, I just sort of lurch from place to place according to opportunity. I think it's not very respectable.
But which of those places, which of those groupings, I mean, were the most challenging for you? What, yeah, I wonder if, yeah.
But curiously, I think I think working with the prisoners was quite tough, but I worked with another person, which was very nice, and so that was very solid, and we made a system that we were pleased with, because the Home Office, which is a part of the government, had set up this experiment, and they were very proud of it. It was a pilot scheme. They were totally proud of it. So they were forever sending judges and foreign visitors to it. And we made a rule that if you came we had a large group meeting every morning. And if people arrived, they were in the large group. And sometimes there would be a judge in the large group who was the person who'd sent one of our prisoners to prison. And so there would be a conversation with them. So there were things like that were very interesting, but did leave you afterwards feeling
Yeah.
quite how did this work? Yeah.
But along this Gestalt spirit, I would say. Yeah.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you, at some point, I imagine you also started. Apart or next to experimenting all the time, as I hear it, you also started to read books, actually,
Yes, well, I think the first one came out in 1980, I think.
Uh-huh.
That was the Gestalt, Red Book of Gestalt,
Mm-hmm.
which I suppose was yes. And that was because a lot of students said they found the PhD book, it was very difficult. I mean, the language is often a bit American, which is they use long words when they don't need to. And so I wrote a simplified form of it. And it wasn't a simplified form. It was the same ideas, but presented in a very different way, with experiments included, so for the students to do. And I wrote that one and then in 2 years later, I did one about groups, which again was a Gestalt book, but about groups, which would be the first and the only book about Gestalt and groups, I think, for a long time, because Pearls never really took much notice of groups. He used the group as a crowd, or as what, he wasn't dealing with the dynamics of the group very much. And so I think I brought that in. And certainly at the Gestalt Center, and it is through me, they have a tremendous lot of training about group behavior and institutional behavior. And they now have a residential. They used to, until lockdown, they used to take the whole training, which is all the counseling training of every year, all the psychotherapy training of every year, all together. So to be about 140, 150 students to a big hotel on the South Coast. And they'd have a week where a lot of the work was large group work, which is heavy stuff. And so that, that is really an extension of Gestalt that I think I have something to do with. Yeah.
So this, when you say institutional behavior, you mean like those big groups that are formed not bottom up, but they are big groups because they belong to an institution. They are part of this institution, like Gestalt Center. This is what you mean by behavior that are affected by this institution, and that's why institutional behavior.
Yes, I was really using the word because they use that word at the Tavistock when they're meaning the sizes of groups. They go up to the institution is the largest, so I wasn't really meaning it necessarily just about institutes, but that certainly is a facet of that behavior. Yeah. And just people behave differently, react differently, form different gestalts according to what size group they're in, and you really feel that if you're doing it in a training and you're put in the different size groups, and so it's a political training in that way, because it's learning to stay self-responsible even in a big group where there's a strong push to collude.
For sure, and it's more and more needed, I guess, in today's world, for sure.
It's which is certainly, you know, can be described in Gestalt terms as fragmentation, can't it? Really, it's just it's very sad, but.
Yes, because we more tend to do those small groups, if you like, small, or I don't know, those like 12, 15 people, which well, in reality, the people, when they gather, there are more of them, and yeah, basically society, somehow the field requires us to, I mean, requires, I don't know how to put it, but generally, as you said, this is a political thing here, around race, for instance, around gender, around class, here in Poland, especially around class.
Over there, yes. And again, I think the technical world is heterogeneity, is belonging to many groups. And I think maturity is to, yes, of course, you belong to the black group if you're black, but you also belong to the human group, you know, and it's managing to belong to your village group and your county group and your country group and the human race, you know, and acknowledge those, where people tend to focus on one group and they belong there and the rest are enemies. And that is.
Yes, so this is what you are also drawing our attention to. Okay, so so this political identity sort of tendencies, and when we as Gestalt therapists support those small groups and don't simultaneously extend it, then we, once again, acknowledge
the other groups.
We somehow somehow petrify somehow this status quo fragmentation. Again. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to also have that in mind, that there is this larger perspective as well, kind of. This is how I understand, and this is actually one of my last question about the future of Gestalt therapy. Maybe it is somewhere here. I don't know if you listen to, I mean, if you hear what's the future of Gestalt therapy, then what would you say? What's your associations? What's your first?
Well, what I would wish for the future for Gestalt therapy is that there was much more training in what we're now calling the political dimension of Gestalt, which is to train therapists to absolutely know and recognize the difference between pairs, small groups, medium groups, large groups, you know, and in a way that is, and the ultimate aim of that is that everybody manages to stay self-responsible as well and socially aware. And I think that's the ultimate maturity, really. And it's far harder to do than to talk about. And I think a lot of therapy is really about improving the feelings of an individual or improving the immediate relationships of an individual. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. but the larger context is massively important, as we're seeing at the moment, when this fragmentation into anti-authority or anti-ethnic groups or whatever, or anti-class, are really going to make sort of horrible few years, at least, for many people in many countries. Mm-hmm. So yeah, mm-hmm. that's my fervent hope. And there is a model of the training that I think we've started at the Gestalt Center, which could be extended. I don't think it's common to have that sort of training. And our students have to take an exam in running a group, running a small group, therapy group, as well as an individual, mm-hmm. to get their diplomas. Mm-hmm. So the emphasis is on the group is important. Freud said there's no such thing as psychotherapy. It is all sociotherapy. Mm-hmm. He was recognizing that you're always dealing with the group. And so the more recognition of that, the better, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. A last thing, because I forgot, and it's only about this novel, or not only, it's about this novel. Can you just say a little about that for the end?
Well, it's one I started a long time ago, but I finished it and got it published during lockdown, partly as a way of sort of using lockdown. And it was only about 4 weeks into lockdown when I was ready to publish it, and there was no printing at that time, no printing. And so I had it published as an ebook, and so it's an online ebook. Mm-hmm. And it's about people who meet on a cruise, on a long cruise, and they're all people from here, there, and everywhere, but they have common problems of shyness and loneliness and the usual things. And by the end of the book, they are contemplating whether they're all going to make a little commune and live together. And so, so it is really about the group to me.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Conveniently, one of them has a very broken down large house, so that it would be feasible, you see, in the story. So that's what it's about.
So I imagine that you have it's under your name, no?
Yeah.
And what's the title?
Rich and Strange.
Okay, and it is available as an ebook. Great.
Yes, it
is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So again, congratulations, and thank you very much for this interview.
It was I really enjoyed myself. I hope there was something useful in it for you. So.
Yes, of course, and for me personally, but I guess for people who are going to listen to it. Okay, so I will